Life did not become expensive only because prices went up. It became expensive because the modern mind quietly grew too many hungry arms. Like an octopus stretched across a glass tank, one arm reaches for convenience, another for stimulation, another for image, another for relief. And soon, spending stops looking like a choice and starts looking like basic adult maintenance. That is the trick. The cost is no longer framed as indulgence, but as normal life. Faster delivery, smoother plans, better upgrades, little rewards, paid shortcuts, small comforts that keep an overloaded mind from feeling friction for even 5 minutes. Inflation matters, yes, but inflation alone does not explain why so many people feel financially squeezed while buying things they never would have called necessary 10 years ago. What changed is the baseline. We built a lifestyle where every restless arm of the octopus gets fed, and then act surprised when the tank is never enough. The real leak is not only in the wallet, it is in what we now call normal. Convenience became dangerous the moment it stopped feeling like a luxury and started acting like emotional life support. The modern octopus mind does not hate effort in any heroic, dramatic way. It simply twitches at friction. One arm wants food now. Another wants the fastest route. Another wants the app to remember, sort, suggest, and remove every tiny decision that might create mental drag. None of this looks reckless. That is exactly why it works. The money leaves in soft, forgettable amounts, while the nervous system quietly learns a new rule. If something is mildly annoying, pay to make it disappear. That rule changes more than your budget. It changes your tolerance. The mind becomes like an octopus kept in perfectly filtered water, overprotected from any shift in current. A short wait starts to feel disrespectful. A small errand feels strangely heavy. Cooking feels inefficient. Planning feels oppressive. And 10 ordinary minutes begin to look like a personal attack. So people do not just buy speed. They buy relief from the discomfort of having to engage with life directly. And once that pattern settles in, convenience stops solving problems and starts manufacturing them. The less friction you face, the less friction you can bear. Now every normal task arrives already wearing a price tag, because the brain has been trained to treat ease as the default setting of adulthood. That is why this habit drains so much money. Not because each shortcut is huge, but because the octopus now reaches for a paid escape before it even reaches for patience. Weekend spending gets expensive long before it looks extravagant. Because for a lot of people, the weekend is no longer rest, it is a rescue mission. After 5 days of being stretched thin, the octopus mind reaches for proof that life is still vivid, still rewarding, still worth the grind. So Saturday cannot just be quiet, it has to sparkle. One arm wants drinks, another wants a better table, another wants photos, another wants motion, noise, novelty. Some purchased evidence that these 2 days meant something. That is why the money goes so easily. You are not only paying for food or plans, you are paying to keep dullness from catching up with you. The trap is repetition. A big celebration once in a while is not what drains people. It is the weekly ritual of upgrading free time into a performance. Soon, rest feels empty unless it is decorated, and a calm weekend starts to look like failure. The tank does not feel full unless every arm of the octopus gets a little stimulation. So the bill is not really for pleasure. It is rent for escaping the suspicion that your ordinary life has gone. The social life gets expensive the moment the octopus mind forgets how to meet without a menu nearby. What used to be connection now arrives wrapped in lighting, service, reservations, transport, tips, and the quiet pressure to order one more thing so the moment feels complete. Nobody says this out loud, of course. It just becomes the new social grammar. Coffee to catch up, drinks to unwind, brunch to bond, dinner to talk properly. Little by little, the paid setting stops being an option and becomes the emotional permission slip. The strange part is not the bill. The strange part is what disappears when every arm of the octopus learns to associate closeness with a commercial backdrop. A walk starts to feel too bare. Sitting at home feels awkward. Inviting someone over feels like work. Simplicity begins to look cheap, not calm. So people are not only paying for food or tables, they are paying for structure, atmosphere, and a socially acceptable stage on which intimacy can happen without anyone having to invent it themselves. That is why this habit leaks money so quietly. You are not buying one meal. You are renting a place for human connection because the modern mind has forgotten that presence used to be enough. A car becomes financially dangerous when it stops being transport and starts becoming a shell the octopus mind climbs into to feel larger than its real life. That is why so many people do not buy for the road they actually drive every day. They buy for the version of themselves that sounds cleaner, sharper, more powerful, more established, less ordinary. The machine looks practical on paper, but the psychology behind it is rarely that innocent. One arm of the octopus reaches for comfort, one for control, one for status, one for the fantasy that a heavier door, a better badge, a louder engine, or a more polished interior might quiet some private insecurity. The price, of course, does not stop at the showroom. It keeps arriving in installments: fuel, insurance, maintenance, repairs, parking, taxes, depreciation, all the invisible little bites that keep feeding the animal long after the excitement is gone. That is the part people hide behind the word practical. But practical for what exactly? For the real rhythm of your life, or for the image your restless mind wants to project while sitting in traffic like everyone else? A car can look normal and still function like a status subscription with wheels. And once the octopus mind bonds to that identity, it no longer measures the vehicle by use. It measures it by what it helps you feel about yourself. That is when mobility turns into ego with monthly billing. One of the most expensive illusions in modern life is the belief that you can keep 8 versions of yourself fully fed at the same time. The octopus mind loves this fantasy. One arm wants to be competent and polished at work. Another wants to be attractive. Another wants to be fit. Another wants to be cultured, organized, well-traveled, emotionally evolved, interesting, informed, and somehow effortless through all of it. None of these identities sound unreasonable on their own. That is the trap. Each one arrives with its own ecosystem of purchases, routines, tools, memberships, products, clothes, subscriptions, gear, and tiny upgrades that quietly demand maintenance. So the money does not disappear in one dramatic decision. It gets pulled apart by many intelligent little arms, each arguing that its need is valid. That is why this kind of spending is harder to notice. You are not buying one luxury. You are financing an internal cast. The modern world keeps rewarding this fragmentation because a divided identity is easier to sell to. Every version of you can be given its own market, its own algorithm, its own shopping list, its own sense of lack. Soon your budget stops serving your life and starts serving the performance of being many people at once. That is not balance. That is an octopus tangled in its own reflection, paying monthly to keep every arm convinced it is the main character. Some of the most expensive habits do not come from vanity. They come from adaptation. Put the octopus mind in a richer tank long enough, and it starts changing color to match the water around it. That is how people end up adopting lifestyles they never consciously chose. It rarely begins with showing off. It begins with exposure. Better restaurants start to look standard. Cleaner neighborhoods feel more reasonable. Nicer hotels, sharper clothes, pricier routines, more polished weekends all stop registering as upgrades and start passing for normal adult life. That shift is dangerous because the mind does not copy only what it sees. It also forgets what used to be enough. The octopus is a brilliant mimic, but mimicry becomes expensive when it borrows the rhythm of a financial life built on someone else's margin. Their cushion is invisible, so their habits look lightweight. Their spending lands softly because it is absorbed by income, assets, family money, or a buffer you do not have. But from the outside, all you see is the surface pattern. And the modern mind is very good at copying surface patterns. So you are not trying to be flashy, you are just quietly recalibrating your standard upward until your own life starts feeling oddly inadequate at its old setting. That is why this trap is so hard to notice. It does not feel like luxury. It feels like catching up to normal, when in reality, you are borrowing someone else's normal without borrowing the structure that makes it safe. Outsourcing turns costly when the octopus mind stops using it as a tool and starts using it as a substitute for adulthood. At first, it feels efficient. Someone else handles the errands, the setup, the cleaning, the forms, the food, the small decisions, the annoying loose ends that make daily life feel messy. The surface logic sounds reasonable. Why waste time on basic tasks when you can pay to keep the day smooth? But that question hides a deeper shift. The more often every minor friction gets handed away, the less your mind stays in contact with the real weight of ordinary life. A clever octopus uses its arms to explore. A dependent one forgets what its arms are for. That is what makes this habit more serious than simple convenience. You are not only spending money, you are slowly disconnecting from competence. When you stop cooking, planning, fixing, comparing, organizing, or handling routine problems yourself, you also stop knowing what these things actually cost in time, effort, and attention. Then every basic task begins to look bigger than it is, and every paid solution starts to feel justified before it is even examined. Soon, the octopus mind is no longer choosing help strategically. It is flinching away from ordinary responsibility. And once that happens, life gets expensive in a quiet, humiliating way. Not because everything is hard, but because you have trained yourself to feel smaller than basic things. Perhaps the most deceptive thing the octopus mind buys is not comfort, status, or convenience, but a preview of a future self. A course, a notebook, a meal plan, new running shoes, a better camera, premium software, expensive kitchen tools, a stack of unread books, gear for a hobby that has not truly begun yet. On the surface, these look like investments. Sometimes they are. But very often, the purchase is doing a different job. It is giving the mind a short, beautiful illusion of movement. For a few hours, sometimes a few days, the octopus feels reorganized. One arm believes it has become disciplined. Another believes it has become creative. Another believes change is finally underway. That emotional lift is real, but it is not the same as transformation. Transformation is repetitive, dull, unphotogenic. It asks the same small things again and again. Buying, on the other hand, delivers a cleaner story. It lets the mind feel like progress has started without paying the deeper price of routine, restraint, and repetition. That is why this habit is so dangerous. It does not feel wasteful. It feels hopeful. The modern world is brilliant at selling symbols of becoming because symbols are easier to purchase than identity is to build. So the tank fills with tools for a life that still has not materialized, and every arm of the octopus keeps mistaking preparation for arrival. In the end, you are not always funding the person you are becoming. Sometimes you are just renting the feeling that this time, becoming is near. So if life has felt strangely expensive, do not only ask what got pricier. Ask which arms of the octopus have been trained to reach for a paid answer every time life feels dull, slow, awkward, or uncertain. That is where the leak really is. Not in one giant mistake, but in 100 little defaults that now wear the costume of normal life. The good news is that what was normalized can also be questioned. A mind that learned to scatter can learn to choose. A life that became crowded with artificial needs can be cleared, one habit at a time. You do not need to cut every comfort. You need to see which comforts quietly turned into commands. Because the moment the octopus stops reacting to every tug, your money stops swimming away with it.